The $10 trillion collapse, why Asia's water tower is already dying. Before sunrise, a fisherman on the Tonle Sap lifts his net. It drips. No weight, no silver, just weeds. In Assam, seedlings that should be knee-deep by noon curl in dust. At 6 p.m., a megacity's skyline brightens, then a village 2 countries away hears its river drop like a door shutting. This isn't weather. A hand on a hidden dial turned water into a schedule. Everyone was told the Himalaya hold endless water. They don't. The ice is thinning, and the gates are learning new tricks. The only question now is brutal and immediate. Who controls the last reliable drops, and why are they hiding the plan? Prove it fast. The myth goes like this: a mountain as big as the sky guarantees water forever. Snow piles up, glaciers bank it, rivers cash the checks all year. That story built cities, power grids, and planting calendars from Pakistan to Vietnam. It's also wrong. The Tibetan Plateau's glaciers have been losing mass steadily for 2 decades. Researchers estimate roughly 340 gigatons gone from 2000 to 2018, with loss rates doubling across the Himalaya after 2000. That endless account is shrinking, and the withdrawals keep rising. Get this, there's a short-term bonus that looks like good news. As ice retreats, melt pulses can temporarily boost dry season flow. Governments point to that bump and call it resilience. But the bonus is a loan. When the glacier empties, late spring and dry season base flow drop. The calendar slips. Taps, turbines, and transplanting dates slip with it. What nobody highlights at the ribbon cuttings: black carbon darkens this whole picture. Soot from stoves, diesel, and industry drifts onto snow, lowering its reflectivity so it melts earlier and faster. Measurements across high mountain Asia show soot rising sharply since the 1990s, matching an acceleration in retreat. It's a quiet push that turns white to gray and weeks to days. Earlier melt means water shows up before fields or grids need it, and there's less left when they do. Meanwhile, another truth hides under the word dam. Dams don't make water, they move time. A run-of-river facility with small storage can still flip a valley's rhythm, peaking at dusk for the grid, then starving fish in canals by morning. Storage dams go further, holding pulses for days or weeks and releasing on command. The hydrograph becomes a sawtooth, up for evening demand, down for the night, up again when markets pay. That's reliable megawatts for a city, but chaos for a farmer reading the river by ear. Upstream advantage stacks beyond concrete. Gauges on the plateau see floods hours to days before plains do. In theory, data sharing saves lives. In practice, selective transparency becomes leverage. Monsoon months bring agreed bulletins. Shoulder seasons lean on memoranda without teeth. When a release arrives early or late, a ministry spokesperson cites operational needs, and villages downstream count dead fish or sanded seedbeds. Here's the twist: those hours are worth more than water, they're worth trust. Scale the stakes. Asia's rivers born on this roof: Indus, Sutlej, Brahmaputra, Salween, Mekong, Yangtze, Yellow, touch power grids for hundreds of millions, irrigate breadbaskets, and underpin fisheries that supply crucial protein. A week's mistiming along one cascade ripples into kilowatts missed in one place and onions priced higher in another. Stack multiple basins misbehaving at once, drought here, a peaking surge there, and the hidden bill lands in energy imports, crop losses, dredging, health, migration, and insurance. That's where the trillions live, not in one disaster, but in coordinated nuisance turning structural risk. Here's the thing about sediment: the currency deltas run on. Every reservoir protects turbines by trapping silt. Every trapped ton is a ton that won't rebuild floodplains or keep a delta above the sea. Fertility drops, fertilizer bills rise, channels clog, dredges chase moving bottoms. Downstream, shrimpers and rice farmers call it bad luck. Upstream, it's a maintenance win with a line item cost exported to someone else. Public messaging sticks to 2 words: hydropower flood control. Internally, planners talk timing, a city's evening peak, a factory's shift change, a brokerage's price signal. That's not sinister by itself, it's modern, but pair it with thinning ice and a warming plateau that tugs the monsoon into bursts and pauses, and timing becomes a weapon, not in headlines, on calendars. A gate held an hour longer during a hot spell can sink a nursery. The same hour in a wet week can spare a substation. Either way, the decision lives far from the field it changes. What about treaties? On the Indus, hard rules keep two rivals inside a lane even through wars. On the Brahmaputra, there's no basin-wide binding pact, just seasonal data sharing, while cascades rise on both sides of the border. On the Mekong, China isn't bound by the Lower Basins Commission. It shares some data through a parallel forum. That patchwork leaves gaps wide enough for rumor to do as much damage as a release. Now layer the plateau's physics. Permafrost slumps, wetlands shrink, and what used to act as a sponge turns into a slick. Storms spike higher, base flow weakens. Glacial lake outburst floods, those sudden rock-laced torrents, add fear that lingers long after the water recedes. Clean snow arrives darker, melt windows shift weeks. Forecasts hedge. Operators hedge too, holding back, then getting hit by a burst they can't keep, or releasing into a valley that isn't ready. So the lie isn't just endless water. It's the idea that volume alone defines security. Timing is wealth here. Who measures it, who discloses it, and who turns it into electrons decides whose lights, fields, and markets run on time. The plateau's emptiness makes projects easier to build and patrols easier to stage. Corridors carry turbines in and megawatts out. Silence protects gates. If that sounds abstract, watch what timing does to real lives downstream. A fisherman reads a lake by the paddles and comes home light. A woman stands knee-deep, waiting for water that now arrives at night. A trader sees fish shrink and prices jump before the news does. That's the calendar being rewritten, one gate at a time. Faces and fields. Here's where it gets personal. While all that was happening in steel and policy rooms, a farmer in Assam was timing life by river height. She set transplanting when the water kissed a mark on the Ghat steppes. It used to be a calendar you could touch. This year the mark lied. The river rose at night, then fell by breakfast. Seedlings sat in cracked trays at noon, while water surged past empty fields at dusk. Her father taught her to listen for the low murmur that meant, tomorrow, knee-deep. It didn't come. A week later, she gambled, planted in dust, then watched a peaking pulse arrive while her tools were in the shed. 1 hour of gate turn upstream erased a month's wages. 3 days earlier, on Cambodia's Tonle Sap, a fisher pushed off before sunrise, reading the lake by sound under his paddle. For years, the reversal, lake breathing in with the Mekong's swell, told him when nets would come up heavy. Lately, the breath caught, the pulse flattened. He still rode the same line, but fish came home smaller and later. Market buyers knew before he did. Prices dropped a day ahead of his catch because traders were watching a cascade's peaking schedule on their phones. He was watching clouds. Here's where it gets interesting. Food prices shifted before the news did, and the lake felt like it had learned a new language. Unknown to them, across the delta in Bangladesh, a schoolteacher kept a flood diary. The right flood fed, the wrong one poisoned. In June, a broad, gentle swell brought silt that brightened fields and refilled ponds. In August, a late, sharp crest broke an embankment and salted a village. Same measured centimeters on a chart, different consequences. She circled days when the color of the water turned tea-brown with good silt. Fewer circles, more smudges. When April flows ran thin, the tubewell tasted brackish, and rice seedlings went yellow. She started storing water in drums and texted cousins across the border when a gauge upstream read, operational release. Those messages arrived faster than official warnings. Now remember, this is a household economy. Evening peaking upstream sends a sawtooth through rooms. In India's interior, a mill ran later when the grid pulsed hot at 6 p.m. The canal arrived cold at dawn. A shopkeeper changed opening hours because pumps finally filled tanks at 11 at night. A kid did homework under a streetlight because power shifted to match urban evenings, not rural mornings. Micro stories hide macro rules. A fisherman sold his net to buy diesel after dry season surges made his old route unworkable. A weaver lost a week when a sudden drawdown stranded her dye vats. Her ledger wrote, river, like an unreliable partner. Meanwhile, one valley over, a relocation order came framed as restoration. Tents for apartments, nets for factory shifts. The stipend looked like safety until a storm met a test release. The river's voice changed. It had been chatter over stones. Now it hummed lower, steadier, until it didn't. A flood slid under streetlights that weren't there last year. A father learned to touch a radiator at dawn to guess the gate upstream. Warm meant night peaking, cold meant wait. His daughter timed school by the hum. What nobody knew at the time was how fast rumors move when water lies. In Mekong villages, satellite charts printed on paper showed low flows in a drought year. Officials explained storage. Boats landed light anyway. In Assam, a WhatsApp forward warned of a midnight crest. Half the hamlet slept on rooftops for nothing. The other half stopped believing the next alert. Trust, once gone, doesn't refill like a canal. Here's the quiet arithmetic. 1 hour's mistimed release equals a week's fish lost, equals a month's rice bought on credit, equals a child pulled from school for a season. Multiply across basins, across seasons that used to rhyme and now collide, and household calendars fill with scratches and arrows. This is timing as a weapon without speeches. It writes itself into kitchens. A mother counts tablets when the clinic's pump stalls. A trader marks red days when salinity creeps past the sweet line on a handheld meter. A monk blesses a procession that pauses at a checkpoint, not a shrine. If you want to understand why timing became leverage, go back to the map's origin, the corridors that let one hand turn a dial and make 100 small lives blink. The historical route, how the map became a lever. Get ready for the reveal. To understand why a dial in one gorge can redraw a harvest 2 countries away, we need to go back to the land's first decision. Collision built a plateau, but it also drew corridors. When the Indian plate slammed into Eurasia, it didn't just hoist summits. It stacked ridges into long north, south walls, carved east, west gorges, and scattered livable pockets like beads on braided rivers. Mobility kept people alive here. Herders moved with grass, traders with passes, monks with seasons. The emptiness between nodes wasn't a gap, it was insurance. Empires learned that lesson early. The Qing treated Tibet as buffer more than heartland, ambans in Lhasa, caravans on the Yarlung's terraces, tribute measured in distance and calm. Reach the knots, watch the passes, and let the open land do the rest. British forays from India tested that logic, sketching a line on a map, the McMahon Line, where ridges and rumor still set the real border. Maps hardened, but the ground stayed seasonal. Then the 20th century flipped the equation. A new state rising in the east saw vulnerability where the Qing had seen insulation. Distance wasn't safety, it was exposure. The PRC arrived not as a swarm, but as a net. Airstrips where valleys allowed, roads stitched over permafrost and scree, garrisons in towns that already held. The pattern was clear: grip the nodes, straighten the corridors, keep the spaces between legible. Emptiness became policy. From buffer logic to corridor control sounds abstract until you watch steel do it. Highways crawled over passes with avalanche sheds and culverts. Later, rails learned to breathe thin air, thermosiphons wicked heat out of permafrost. Oxygen pumps tamed passenger cars. Each span cut days into hours. Each siding turned junctions into magnets. Towns thickened, grasslands thinned. The state's reach stopped being seasonal. It became scheduled, and scheduled power means scheduled rivers. Meanwhile, another layer stacked on the map: data. Gauges rose where the headwaters begin. Flood warnings learned to travel faster than clouds. The institutional pivot looked mundane: hydro bureaus, survey teams, weather stations, but it taught policy to hold the knots with numbers. The same corridors that brought diesel and transformers could export timing decisions as electrons. Ultra-high voltage lines marched alongside rails. A gate's hour upstream could light a district downstream. Past treaties and present gaps frame the choices. Where rules exist, like on the Indus, papers held even through wars. Where they don't, Brahmaputra, Mekong arrangements leaned on memoranda and seasons. Basin commissions without teeth met maps with fresh concrete. Rumors of diversions traveled faster than projects, shaping politics without pipes. But hold on, that emptiness near borders, it wasn't failure to populate, it was a lever. Fewer civilians meant fewer evacuations during standoffs. Fewer settlements along headwaters meant fewer vetoes at dam sites, easier land acquisition, simpler patrols. When glacial lakes burst or test releases misbehaved, casualty lists stayed short. In a place where altitude taxes engines and lungs, legibility becomes power. A dust plume on an empty slope reads like punctuation. A new bridge appears where last week was ice. Follow the steel, it points to the gates. Rail spurs don't end at scenic overlooks. They end at river bends tightened into ladders of concrete. Logistics wrote the sequence: depot, tunnel, switchyard, dam. Maintenance crews became governance, thermosiphons tended, embankments regraded, rockfall nets mended. Permanence grew costly and present. Once the corridor exists, the gorge pays rent forever. That price buys control. The human map folded with it. Monasteries that once drew soft boundaries across valleys found themselves on timetables. Pilgrimage routes crossed checkpoints. Festivals moved to plazas where barriers could guide crowds. Faith adapted, movement shrank. A relocation order could turn pasture into a reservoir bank and a lineage into a street address, all by citing restoration and megawatts in the same sentence. The river's old chatter over stones learned a new hum. The result wasn't inevitable, it was chosen. Collision offered height and corridors. Policy learned to hold them. Emptiness became curated. Nodes became levers. Data turned into disclosure or delay. And because those rivers leave the plateau and grow into nations, a decision in one gorge now reaches kitchens and markets 1,000 kilometers away. The map didn't just become a lever, it became a clock. Steel over sky, corridors to control headwaters. While maps drew lines, steel taught them to hold. The first lesson came with altitude. Engines gasp where oxygen thins, so locomotives were rebuilt to breathe harder, turbochargers tuned for climbs at 5,000 meters, fuel mixes adjusted so combustion wouldn't stall on an icy morning. Passenger cars became moving clinics, piping oxygen under seats so tourists didn't faint between tunnels. Under every wheel, the ground was changing state. Permafrost wanted to slump. Thermosiphons were drilled like metal reeds to wick heat upward, crushed rock laid to vent cold, embankments layered to keep summer from chewing the base. It wasn't elegant, it was relentless. Keep the lines straight, keep the ground frozen, keep trains on time. Here's where it gets interesting. Notice where the steel goes. It hugs valleys, kisses basins, and leaps to places that already mattered. Lhasa turned from highland capital into a logistics throat. Depots stacked with pipe, turbines, and transformers became the plateau's metronomes. Westward, track shadowed the Yarlung's course toward Shigatse. Eastward, it crept toward the deep gorges where a river becomes two countries, question at once. Every spur was a sentence that ended at a dam site. The corridor didn't democratize space, it concentrated power. Unknown to most riders, every kilometer is a promise to concrete. A siding here means a staging yard there. Bridges rated for heavy axle loads don't ask whether they carry flour or penstocks. Convoys of nacelles and generator rotors moved like bead strings under police lights, right to bends already marked for cascading walls. In narrow gorges, logistics isn't background. It's force projection with invoices. If a turbine goes down, a night train can deliver the part. If a spillway gate sticks, a maintenance crew arrives with thermite and a list. Permanence is policy disguised as repair. Ultra-high voltage lines marched in parallel, silver pylons striding across scree and pasture. Electrons don't care about borders, they care about resistance. Those lines turned upstream timing into downstream consumption, peaking decisions carried as current toward demand centers a day's drive away. A switch in a control room on the plateau could nudge a megacity's evening lights brighter, while a village in the valley heard the river lower its voice. That's not drama, that's a schedule. Maintenance didn't look like sovereignty until it did. Summer thaw softened a culvert, crews injected grout. Frost heave buckled a slab, a grinder shaved it back before the ballast rolled. An avalanche shed took a hit, welders stitched it shut under floodlights. A train that doesn't stop is a boundary you can't argue with. Patrols ride rails and roads alike. Dust plumes on otherwise empty hillsides tell you if an unscheduled truck moved. Emptiness makes surveillance cheap. The corridor turns that discount into policy. Dual use stopped being a euphemism the day an exercise overlapped with a delivery. The same segment that feeds a dam can move armor. Oxygen debt becomes a tactical edge for units stationed at 3,500 meters, their blood acclimatized, their logistics prepositioned by the siding. Airfields extend runways to match density altitudes. Fuel bladders sit under tarps at junction towns. None of it needs a press conference. You can read it in the cadence of trains. Meanwhile, steel steers markets. Mines open where ore meets road, not where geology whispers alone. Copper, lithium, and tungsten that once hid behind 7 days of mule track now sit one good highway from a crane. Tourism follows too, coaches with oxygen packs, itineraries that match station clocks and festival permits. Money moves along gradients of accessibility. Off-corridor villages watch taillights and learn that growth is a timetable, not a promise. There was one problem the crews solved by ritual: ground that won't stay still. Thermosiphons demand rent. Reflective rock blankets need replacing. Drainage must be coaxed where ice lenses try to hold it. Engineers carry infrared cameras like doctors' stethoscopes, hunting warm patches that predict failure. Governance becomes a grader scraping ruts before a supply train derails and a county runs out of diesel. When a storm closes a pass, managers do triage, dim streetlights to keep the oxygen plant running, throttle an industrial load to keep the clinic warm. Logistics is politics in a spreadsheet. The corridor also exports certainty. A dam ladder isn't just concrete, it's a calendar wired to a dispatch center. A peaking schedule demands that a train arrive with a bearing, a crew, and a window when the line is quiet. River ice used to govern winter, now inspection cycles do. If a glacial lake outburst flood takes out a spur, contingency maps unroll. Alternate route, reserve stocks, drones for survey, front-end loaders to clear rock until a bridge truss assembled by number slots into place. Fail small, fix fast, because the grid downstream won't tolerate improvisation. While that was happening, emptiness hardened into buffer along the ridges. Fewer towns near the steel meant fewer detours when a convoy moved, fewer evacuations if a standoff flared, fewer eyes to stir rumor when a night train hauled something no one needed to name. Silence kept timing safe. The plateau's old habit of distance was curated into a system that could turn water into hours and hours into money. Steel delivers concrete and concrete delivers clocks. Follow the rails and lines far enough uphill and you end at a control room where the river's voice is measured in megawatts and ramp rates. The gorge becomes a valve, the calendar becomes an instrument, and everything downstream, fish markets, transplanting dates, evening peaks, plays along whether they know the tune or not. The dam calendar, how timing rewrites nations. Cliffhanger you can feel, run-of-river sounds harmless until you see the teeth. A small forebay, a narrow reservoir, and gates that breathe with the grid. Operators ramp up at dusk to chase evening demand, then throttle back after midnight. Downstream, that rhythm lands like a metronome on a living river. Shallows fill and empty within hours. Fish that queue on steady flow for migration find themselves stranded on gravel at dawn. Farmers who once read the bank by hand find a canal that runs fat at the wrong time and thin when the field is ready. Storage turns the dial further. Week-long pulses are banked behind concrete and released when markets pay. A flood that would have spread silt broadly in June becomes a measured pulse in July to cover a regional heat wave. Cities feel grateful. Villages below the dam ladder count the cost in bent seedlings and empty fish traps. The hydrograph used to arc and fade with seasons. Now it looks like a saw laid on its side, sharp edges, hard corners, and very little in between. Here's where it gets practical. Grid operators call it flexibility. Hydropower can ramp faster than thermal plants and steadier than wind. In a system thick with solar, peaking dams cover the hour when the sun drops and air conditioners climb. In the control room, it's elegant. Megawatts dispatched, frequency held, blackouts avoided. In the valley, it's sudden swell at 6, quiet at 2, then a 4 a.m. spike to refill the forebay before morning demand. That gap between elegance and impact is policy written in water. Sediment takes the long view, and it doesn't like schedules. Turbines hate grit, so reservoirs do the cleaning by trapping it. Every year a delta's inheritance stops at a dam face. Downstream, fertility sinks. Farmers make up the shortfall with fertilizers that wash back as nutrient pulses and algal blooms. Channels rise with weeds. Dredges arrive, expensive and late. Meanwhile, operators upstream note improved turbine efficiency and longer asset life. The bill lives beyond the wall. Evidence isn't abstract. On the Mekong, cascades in the upper reaches have flattened the dry season heartbeat. Tonle Sap's famed reversal is arriving later, staying weaker, and pushing fish into smaller windows for spawning, consistent with observed low-flow years and altered lake dynamics. On the Brahmaputra's shoulders, small shifts in spring flow, nudged by peaking and test releases, ripple into irrigation calendars across Assam. 1,000 micro-adjustments add up. Pump schedules, labor hiring, seed purchases, and debt rolled forward when the river blinks off at the wrong hour. Then there's the daily, up-down ramp rates. Fish eggs glued to cobbles don't survive a 10-centimeter drop in 20 minutes. Fry moving nocturnally to avoid predators get swept into dewatered side channels by pre-dawn refill. Guides talk about perch lines on the bank, a dirty stripe that tells you where water climbed last night and where it will leave you by morning. It's a clock with no face, only evidence. Data sharing could soften the edges. In some basins, agreements provide monsoon season levels, 5 days, advance for major releases, and hourly data during floods. But shoulder seasons remain gray. Memoranda of understanding aren't binding calendars. Operators cite grid contingencies. Downstream planners stack contingency plans of their own, build more storage at the tail end, switch crop varieties, move to shrimp as salinity creeps inland. Each adaptation solves a problem and seeds another. Market design hides inside all of this. Energy-only markets reward peak-hour megawatts more than steady baseflow. Ancillary service payments turn dams into frequency guardians, paid to twitch on command. The river doesn't bill for ramping. Households downstream do, in errands delayed and food gone dear. A trader at a wholesale fish market doesn't need a gauge. The price curve shows when an upstream gate learned to sprint. Here's the complicating twist. Climate volatility pushes grid operators deeper into hydropaking. Solar's duck curve grows steeper, wind sags during heat domes, fossil plants retire under emissions rules. Dams become the shock absorbers of a jittery system. That's not villainy, it's physics. But every avoided blackout upstream writes a quieter failure downstream. A nursery flooded out of phase, a salinity line creeping past an intake, a community well turned metallic in April. Some fixes exist, and they're not science fiction. Minimum environmental flows can set a floor under the sawtooth. Ramping rate limits smooth the slopes so fish and irrigators can adjust. Synchronized peaking across cascades reduces compounding shocks. Sediment bypass tunnels move grit past the wall during high flows. Batteries paired with dams absorb the twitch so gates don't have to. All of it costs megawatt hours, all of it buys something harder to price: trust. Trust matters because rumors move faster than water. If a release arrives unexpectedly, a WhatsApp group can empty a town square or keep families asleep on a night when they shouldn't be. In drought years, suspicion can do more damage than a cubic meter per second. Politicians promise diversions that don't exist, protests flare at embankments, and a flood warning ignored once becomes a tragedy twice. This is the calendar that rewrites nations, not with diversions that make headlines, but with dials turned at 19:00 and 03:30, evening peaks that light a distant skyline and pull water out from under a farmer's feet, dry season shaves that keep a megacity cool, and salted deltas roots. The choice isn't between power and people, it's between blind peaking and negotiated time. Between treating rivers as wires and treating them as seasons that still feed the kitchens they pass. Climate squeeze, glaciers, heat pumps, and GLOFs. Heat rewrites the high country faster than policy can. Instruments on ridge stations show the plateau warming quicker than the global average. Snowlines creep upslope, and melt windows slide earlier into spring. In the near term, rivers look generous. Extra melt swells shoulder season flow. That's the bonus everyone points to. But it's a front-loaded payment from a shrinking account. When the ice stock thins, late spring fades, and dry season base flow weakens. The calendar, the valley trusted stops, matching the sky. Black carbon makes the slide steeper. Soot from diesel, stoves, and stacks rides winds from the south and west, settles into snowfields, and darkens what used to reflect. The effect is small in color and large in timing. Low albedo means more absorbed sun, earlier thaw, and pulses that arrive before fields or grids need them. Researchers digging ice cores on the plateau see the same story: rising soot since the 1990s, acceleration in retreat to match. It's not just warmer air, it's darker snow. Permafrost answers heat by letting go. The ground that anchored roads and held water like a slow sponge starts to slump. Drainage patterns flip, alpine wetlands shrink or shift, springs wander. On a hydrograph that shows up as flashier peaks after storms and thinner threads through dry spells, a landscape that once inhaled and exhaled slowly now coughs, harder bursts, longer pauses. Operators hedge with storage, herders hedge with longer migrations. Both find the ground under their feet less dependable, consistent, with observed permafrost degradation on the plateau. Then there's the plateau heat pump, The engine few outside the region talk about, but farmers feel in their bones. As the surface warms in spring and early summer, air rises and helps pull moist monsoon flow northward. Change the surface, less snow, more dark ground, and the pump's cadence shifts. Some years it tugs rain in earlier, then sputters, bunching storms into violent bursts separated by dry pauses. Seeds wait under dust, then drown in a 2-day torrent. Reservoir managers stretch releases on a forecast that hedges, then get caught by a sudden wall of rain when gates are already high. Glacial lakes turn that volatility into headlines. As glaciers retreat, they leave behind walls made of loose rock and ice, weak natural dams holding turquoise bowls in high cirques. A hot week, a slope failure, or a heavy rain can tip the balance. A glacial lake outburst flood doesn't announce itself with a neat crest. It arrives as a brown, boulder-laced wall. Bridges go in minutes. Power lines vanish. Fields flatten under slurry that sets like cement. The water recedes by nightfall. The fear stays for seasons. Kids learn new routes to school around a missing span. Insurers learn new exclusions. Black carbon and warming team up to move the year forward. Farmers in mid-altitude basins tell you spring arrives a week early, but leaves a month early too. Flowering shifts. Pest cycles shift. Snowmelt-fed canals flush when soil is still cold, then run whisper-thin when seedlings thirst. Operators in control rooms see it as misaligned curves, renewables sagging under heat domes, hydropower twitching to cover, then held back for August. A system built on predictable delay, snow banking monsoon excess, loses its slack. Forecasting strains, seasonal outlooks used to anchor decisions, planting windows, reservoir rule curves, maintenance on lines. Now the variance swallows the mean. An El Niño tilts odds drier. The plateau's darkened surface amplifies local heating and fragments the monsoon's arrival. In the valley that reads as a false start, 2 rains and silence. Upstream, operators split the difference, hold too much and risk a spill into unready channels, release too early and face a late July power crunch. Each wrong bet feeds the rumor mill downstream. Permafrost slumps also change hazard maps. Rockfall increases above gorges slated for dam ladders. Landslides that once froze in place creep on warm nights. Road cuts ooze. Thermosiphons that kept embankments rigid demand more attention. Maintenance windows shrink, and the cost of permanence climbs. When a glacial lake lets go above a construction site, the runway of good weather isn't just shorter, it's stitched with sirens. Communities adapt with whatever tools they can reach. In high valleys, simple siphons drain perched lakes before monsoon. Prayer flags share space with sensor poles. In Assam, embankment committees sketch new breach points to relieve pressure away from homes. In Cambodia, fish refuges, deep pools set aside, keep broodstock alive through weird dry season shelves. Upstream, some operators test gentler ramping. A pilot sediment bypass nudges grit past concrete during safe flows. These aren't silver bullets, they're friction added to a sliding system. Here's the squeeze in one sentence. Warming speeds the conveyor belt just as the belt's flywheel ice shrinks. The plateau that once steadied Asia's water turns into a strict accountant. Timing tightens, errors cost more. Upstream, that argues for tighter grips. More gauges, firmer rules in control rooms, gates that answer markets and risk models. Downstream, it argues for guarantees, minimum lifeline flows, transparent peaking schedules, sediment to deltas, and promises that hold when the sky doesn't. Storage looks like the fix until it is. Big reservoirs promise smoothing, then concentrate risk. A hotter, burstier monsoon means wider swings between empty and emergency spill. Batteries and smarter dispatch can take the twitch off hydro without turning rivers into wires every night. Wetlands and floodplains, protected or rebuilt, can buy days and centimeters that matter. Trust, rebuilt in increments, can turn a midnight rumor into a message believed. Meanwhile, the ice ledger keeps turning pages. Fewer white fields each spring, more turquoise bowls rimmed with loose stone, more brown walls that roar without warning. Calendars in kitchens pick up extra pencil marks. In control rooms, operators stare at screens where curves no longer match last decade's training. The climate squeeze doesn't announce itself with a single catastrophe. It arrives as a misfit between clocks, sky, river, grid, and field, and the knowledge that the old delays are gone.